Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk webinar series. If you have any questions during the presentation today, please type them into the questions tab on the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the November 17th edition of CropTalk, and kind of fitting today that we maybe talk a little bit about weather. We've been seeing a lot of different weather situations happening in Manitoba and even across the country here. So it's maybe something that we can learn a little bit about today, as we have Timmy Ojo, who's been on several times talking, and Haley Wright, both working with our Ag Weather Department, and both have good experience on some of the stuff that happens in Manitoba here regarding our how we report our weather and how we do different things that are available to producers. So I guess, with that, I think maybe what we'll do is we'll dive right into it. And I think we're starting off with Haley this morning, and they'll be going back and forth. So you can hand the screen over to Haley, and we'll get started.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Lionel. Thanks, Laurie. Can everybody hear me and see my screen?
You bet, Haley.
Okay, fantastic. All right, I'll get started then. So thanks again for having us. There we go. Okay, so we'll just take a look at a quick outline of what Timmy and I are going to be chatting about today. So we're going to take a quick look at the 2021 growing season and how things were looking in the province, in the ag region specifically. Then we'll look at just an early look at the off season to date. We're only a couple weeks into the off season, so it is early yet, but we'll have a quick look at that as well. And next up, Timmy's gonna look at what some of the models are saying for the winter, and what's forecasted for the next couple of months. And then I'll wrap up the presentation with just a few updates from our program. Okay, so just starting off with a look at the 2021 growing season here. So although we're going to be taking a look at quite a few maps and charts today, I think it's safe to say that we probably didn't need to look at the data this summer to understand what was really going on. We probably just needed to look at the ground in a lot of cases. So it's pretty safe to say that the 2021 growing season was quite hot and dry for many producers. But nevertheless, let's have a look at some data anyways. So we'll get started with just looking at a temperature anomaly that we saw this growing season. So the map on the left, we're looking at the mean temperature anomaly throughout the growing season. And it's worth noting here that the entire ag region actually experienced positive temperature anomalies, or otherwise put, warmer than average temperatures. So the mean temperature anomaly across Manitoba ranged from just over 0 degrees, so about 0.5 to about 2.5 degrees above average. So certainly on the warm side. And then taking a look at some of the heat accumulation maps. On the right, we are seeing a similar pattern across most of the ag region as well. So specifically looking at growing degree days on the right, we did see near normal to above normal in 2021, and we'll take a look at corn heat unit and potato day accumulation as well on the next slide, and we'll see that those ranges are quite similar. So specifically at the GDD map, we're seeing about 96 to 125% of normal this season. And looking at the side by side here, you can start to see some of the patterns emerging. So we are seeing some similarities in the mean temperature difference and of course heat accumulation. So yeah, as I mentioned, we'll also look at corn heat units and potato days. So very similar very similar ranges and trends here as well. So for the corn heat unit accumulation, we're seeing about 96 to 122% of normal. And for potato days, we're ranging from about 96 to 124. Excuse me. So again, just similar patterns and ranges of above normal temperature and heat accumulation this year. So I wanted to just spend a bit of time looking at some of the extremes that we experienced. So we've got a couple tables here, and the one on the left is showing the count of days that reached 30 degrees throughout the growing season. So if a station hit at least 30 degrees Celsius one day, we add one day to the counter there. So I'm just showing the top 20 stations here, but just wanted to point out that actually all reporting stations in our network had at least 10 days that reached 30 degrees. And as you can see, Winkler on the top here reported 44 days over 30 degrees Celsius. So comparing to how things were last year, Winkler was also the hotspot last year, but quite a few less days over 30 at 28 days. So the range last year across our entire network was 2 to 28 days over 30 experienced at our weather stations. So in the table on the right is showing the max temperatures reached over the growing season at each of our stations. Again, only the top 20 are being shown here, but I wanted to point out that the max temperature range ranged from 33 to, as we can see, over 40 degrees Celsius. So 4 stations in our network hit 40 degrees this growing season compared to 0 last summer. And last summer, the range was about 28 to 36 degrees Celsius across the weather stations in our ag region. So we need to talk about precipitation, obviously, as well. And for consistency, I wanted to take a look at the same date range for percent normal precipitation throughout the growing season. So that's May 1st to October 31st. And, you know, I hesitated to start with this map just because I think some folks could, you know, look back on the 2021 growing season and say, well, you know, not too bad in the Southwest, and yeah, certainly a little dry in the Interlake and the East. But I think the reality is that this map doesn't really show the full picture. So I'm gonna, even though I made this map, I'm gonna tear it apart a little bit here. So if we take a look at what's going on here, we can see that, you know, parts of the central and northwest region reached upwards of 80% of normal, and even above normal in parts of the southwest. And this is by the end of the growing season. But it's just so important to note that this map doesn't communicate the timing of that rainfall, which unfortunately was too little too late for so many producers across the ag region. And one other thing worth pointing out is that the map, it also doesn't communicate the duration between precipitation events, which was quite problematic this year in many regions. We had an extremely dry July with really no widespread significant rainfall between about mid-June to mid-August. So quite a long dry spell there that's not obvious in this map. So I think it's important to look at these maps instead, or at least in conjunction with the previous slide. So on the left, looking at July specifically, we can see that, you know, aside from the PAW and a few isolated locations in the west, much of the ag region saw less than 40% of normal precipitation in July, so very, very dry. And you know, with that said, and taking a look at where things were in our network by the end of July, perhaps the May to August map on the right is a more representative map of the 2021 growing season for many producers, just given that the precipitation that came afterwards, you know, it was likely too little too late for many areas. So I wanted to take a look at one specific station in particular. I'm kind of zeroing in on Toulon here in the Interlake, but just want to point out that, you know, many parts of the province just had very dry conditions. So we're looking at the darker bold line in this chart is actually showing what we would expect in a normal year over a 30-year average period. And we just didn't get there this year. And actually looking back 4 years, we really didn't get there in the past 4 years. So it's just been quite dry. And if we just look at 2021 growing season, if we isolate that line there, it's worth mentioning that, you know, I was talking about those long dry periods, in particular mid-June to about early to mid-August there. So quite a long stretch with no rain. You know, August wasn't bad. You know, we did see some rainfall in August, which is really needed, but then followed by quite a dry fall as well throughout September and into October. Excuse me, and into October. So in a nutshell, quite hot and dry conditions throughout the growing season this past season. So and with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Timmy. He's going to continue on the conversation with the growing season outlook, but he's going to focus a little bit on wind. He's going to talk about crop water balance and fall soil moisture as well. So with that, I'll pass it back to Timmy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ellie. And again, Ellie had really rightfully said things were hot and dry for the most part over the 2021 growing season. But something that we also noticed this year was the wind, especially in the spring. And I'm showing on this slide table of the maximum wind speed that we recorded on June 11. So early afternoon to mid-evening, we did saw a system that rode through with, you know, about 7 locations actually recorded 100 km/h wind speed or more, as you're seeing on this screen. But beyond just that one event that occurred on July 11, over the course of the spring from May 1st to June 15, analyzed data at 25 weather stations across Agro-Manitoba. And over the spring period, we noticed that the mean daily maximum wind speed for 2021 came to about 443 km/h. And that was, again, a good 3.5 km/h above the average over the last 15 years. The closest to the 2021 that we saw was actually in 2012, which was only 41.2. So generally, again, the spring was not just hot and dry, it was also windy. And when you take a look at the daily average wind speed, and this is just on each day, definitely some days will be windier, other days will be calm. But then on the average for the spring was 15.8 km/h. And the average over the last 15 years is actually just 14.4. So basically, again, we noticed that this past spring was windier. And what does that imply? It simply means that it's going to drive the drying of any precipitation that we did receive. And that brings me to crop water balance. And I tend to use this ATM, illustration in which you can't just put your ATM card in the ATM machine. You can't put your debit card in the machine and expect to get money if you don't have money in it already. And so at some point, again, if you keep drawing from your account without putting anything back, it's going to come up as insufficient fund at some point. And that's a similar scenario to what I tend to call the simplified crop water budget, in which the amount of water you have in the soil is based on the precipitation, the difference between precipitation and evapotranspiration. And evapotranspiration is simply the combined loss of water from the plant, which is transpiration, and then from the soil surface, which is evaporation. Early in the spring, before you have the ground cover, before you have established plant biomass, you would have mostly evaporation occurring because the plants have not well shaded the ground. However, as the crops develop, you do have that transitioning from the ET, in which you have more of transpiration occurring, you have more crop water being used by the plant and less of evaporation. So this would be the debit, and the P, which is the precipitation, is the credit. Now, for the full water budget, the amount of water you have in the root zone is based on the input. Input in this case would be irrigation and rainfall. That's what credits the account. That's what add water to the root zone. But not just those alone. You sometimes also have capillary rise, which I think in 2017, I believe that was what I'll call the saving grace, because in 2017 it was actually quite dry. No, not as dry as 2021, but 2017 summer was also quite dry. However, most producers did not feel that impact because 2016 was so wet, and at that point we do have many of our groundwater wells actually showing groundwater level quite high, close to the root zone, if not within the root zone, such that capillary rise played a major factor in 2017. In most years, definitely in this year, most of the groundwater levels are well below the root zone, so you don't expect capillary rise to play an important factor. So these three combined is what I would call the input, or what add water to the root zone. Now, in terms of what takes the water away, that's the debit. Again, the big part is the evapotranspiration. So it's both evaporation from the soil surface and transpiration from plant leaves. It's usually combined as ET. And then sometimes you have deep percolation or deep drainage below the root zone. This is usually more. You have this occurring more in coarse textured soils like sandy soils, so Shiloh for instance, or some part of Elm Creek where you have very sandy soils. You would have again deep percolation or drainage in which water moves below the root zone if you do have intense precipitation, high amounts of precipitation. But another pathway for water loss is also runoff. Again, sometimes again in places around the Red River Valley where you have heavy clay soils, you tend to have more runoff than deep percolation. And finally, sometimes you do have subsurface flow. So this can either be positive or negative depending on the slope of the area. But sometimes you do have subsurface flow in which water flows into the soil, and then the same, maybe sometimes the same amount or more or less flows out. So basically, this is the crop water balance. However, we tend to simplify it by saying, we assume that if the producer did not irrigate, so this does not play a factor. If there is no capillary rise, if the groundwater level is too low, then you won't have capillary rise. Let's assume there is no drainage, no runoff, and subsurface flow is doesn't play a factor. You are left with precipitation and evapotranspiration. So this is the simplified crop water budget. Now, how does this shape out, in this past 2021 growing season? I'm showing here the crop water balance at Center Dove for wheat. Now, notice it's wheat because every crop will have different evapotranspiration, especially different crop coefficient that determines how much water is being used. For instance, corn would use more water than wheat just because it stays longer on the ground, and again because of the orientation of the leaf as well, just the demand. So wheat typically in a typical year, I think would use about, I'd say 350, 400 thereabout millimeters of water. Again, depending on where you are, depending on how much water is available. When you take a look at this chart, this shows the circles are the 2019, and you'd notice that for each of the 3 successive years, we keep having worse deficits occurring. Actually, at some point in early August, the deficit at Center Dove was almost 350 millimeters. Now, that's 14-inch deficit of moisture when you compare how much water the plant needs compared to how much precipitation we got. Now, you would notice, especially again, these bars right here, the vertical bars shows the precipitation at Center Dove in 2021. And something that you would note, and I think Ailey mentioned that as well, between the end of June and mid-August, sorry, between end of June and mid-August, that's about 6 weeks range. Within those 6 weeks, Center Dove got about 1 inch of precipitation in total. Now, when you compare that to the crop water demand for wheat, typically at that stage of the wheat, again, just approaching flowering and heading, you'd expect that wheat would use typically about 1/3 of an inch every day. That's the estimated amount of water that a wheat crop would use. Now, it means that within a 3-day cycle, you would expect the wheat crop to use about an inch of water. Now, that's the equivalent that we got in 6 weeks. So we got 6 weeks amount, we got only 3 days worth of precipitation, 3 days worth of moisture over a 6-week period, which is definitely, again, why we did saw the low yield that we've seen this year. Now, you'd notice that in mid-August, again, that the center dove got about 2 inches of precipitation in mid-August, and that tend to really seem to improve things in terms of the crop water deficit. However, it was quite too late, because by mid-August to early September, you're ready, again, to harvest. And by mid-October, the 2021 growing season in terms of the crop water deficit is ending at almost the same point where we were in 2020. And that shows about, again, 200 millimeters of deficit. So that's just about 8 inches of deficit that we are experiencing at that location. Now, when you contrast that to what we observed in 2019, so this shows 2019, folks would remember in 2019, we had quite a dump of precipitation, snow and rain during the October long weekend. And that was why, although it was also deficit initially, the precipitation we received end of September and into October actually did help, such that by the end of the season, we were actually not at a deficit in 2019. This again would have played a major factor in helping us with the 2020 growing season. Unfortunately, we did not have that in the fall of 2020, such that soil moisture was low starting in 2021. And typically, I would say the typical growing season precipitation that we receive is usually not enough to meet the crop water demand. So we do need the impact of soil moisture. And that takes me to the chart, the map on fall soil moisture. Now, these two maps are showing what we observed fall of 2019 that I mentioned, where we had, again, tons of precipitation in the fall in September and October, and then the fall of 2020. Now, we don't have a similar map for this year yet, because the ground is not frozen just yet. We usually create these maps right at freezing. But I know that this year's soil moisture would likely be lower, or maybe similar to 2020. So we would likely be closer to 2020 than 2019. The last soil moisture map that we made during the regular growing season was on October 31st, and it does show, again, the Northwest, Interlake, and Southeast being at that dry range. The areas that actually showed optimal simply means that they are at field capacity or below field capacity. And looking at the actual data, many of them were actually at about 60% of field capacity, which we still tend to call optimal, but again, on the very low end of things. Now, in terms of an early look into this off-season till date, again, within the Ag Weather program, we usually classify May till end of October as the growing season, and then off-season between November and the next April. So for what we've seen in the first couple of weeks, again, the mean temperature difference from normal, things have been warmer than normal. Again, many locations have been up to 3 to 4 degrees above normal temperature at this time of the year in the first 2 weeks of November. Now, it's still very early, so we can't really make a big deal out of it, but still, it suffices to say that we are currently sitting at above normal precipitation. Normal temperature. In terms of precipitation, again, the southeast corner of the province have received more, and quite significant precipitation, especially with last week's precipitation event. And so that's a good thing. And that actually brings me to the impact of the snowfall timing on soil moisture. And I got this chart from the good old Nature and Properties of Soil textbook for folks that are familiar with soil science and soil science textbooks, Brady and Will. So basically, the fact is that when the topsoil is frozen before you receive snow, so that's this first chart right here, temperature drops below freezing mark and the topsoil is frozen. If you receive snow on top of a frozen soil, what it means is that when it's time for the snow to melt, most of the melted water would actually run off because the soil surface is still frozen. However, if the topsoil is unfrozen, so there's no ice in the topsoil, and then you receive a dump of snow, because the topsoil is unfrozen, most of the snow would actually melt and infiltrate into the soil. Now, when you take a look at where we are right now in terms of which of these two, the top or the below charts, this is the average hourly soil temperature at our network, at some locations in our network as of this morning, 6 a.m. today. And most stations, most locations are actually sitting between 1 and 4 degrees right now. Now, and with the snow that we got, it means that this second aspect is where we are at, in which we have no ice, the topsoil is still unfrozen, we have snow on most of our soils. And what that means is when it's time, which is a good thing, when it's time for the snow to melt, it would likely melt in. And that's because the snow actually creates an attenuation effect. It works as a blanket on the soil surface such that the soil doesn't get frozen quickly as it would have if there was no snow on it. So the snow we currently have is a good thing, again, blanketing, and we don't have the soil freezing as fast as it could have. And I would expect that maybe by, say, late next week or by in 2 weeks' time is when I would expect many locations to start dropping below the freezing point, again, depending on how cold things get. So that's kind of what is currently, but then what may be. So what's the forecast saying? Again, I always like to preface this conversation by saying forecast is what it is. You take it with a grain of salt in terms of it gives us a generic idea of what we likely would have, but it's no certainty. So basically, again, the forecast is that La Nina has developed and it will persist for the second year in a row. And in a typical La Nina year, we would expect to see colder and drier than normal temperatures on the Caribbean Prairie. Now, this is a tendency, it's not a guarantee. It's just what we typically would see, but there's no guarantee. Actually, last year, it was also a La Nina, but on the average, the Manitoba Ag region actually experienced warmer than normal temperature during the off season. So between November and April, we actually were warmer than normal, despite the fact that it's La Nina. So that's why I said there's a tendency, it's not a guarantee. So basically, again, what are the models saying? This is the climate forecast system. It's from the US, from NOAA, and their forecast is showing that for temperature, again, a typical La Nina pattern for Canadian prairies, we are forecasted to be about 1 to 2 degrees colder than average. Now, that's the forecast. We may or may not see this happen. And in terms of precipitation, again, using the US model, the precipitation is actually showing that for, on the average. Now, this is an average, doesn't mean every day that's what we would see, just on the average over the next 3 months. So these maps are for for December, January, and February. And so it's simply showing that on the average, especially around the southeast corner of the province, we may likely see just slightly above normal precipitation, so slightly wetter in some of those, central and southeastern parts. Other location would likely be normal. Again, that's what the forecast is saying. This is the US forecast. The Canadian forecast, which is the CANSIPS, that's the Canadian Seasonal to Interannual Prediction System. And again, for the same 3 months period, December, January, February, it's actually showing that we would be slightly warmer than average temperature, which is kind of really interesting because the US is showing that will be slightly cooler based on La Nina, but then the CANSIP is showing that will be slightly warmer than normal. on the average about 1 degree Celsius warmer than normal. And in terms of precipitation, the CANSIP is showing that it's going to be normal. Like we won't be drier, we won't be above. It's just, again, equal probability of, being either ways. So what does all this mean? Typically, this is like the summary map that Environment Canada produces, and the seasonal temperature and precipitation forecast. For temperature, it's simply showing, again, across the Manitoba, there's an equal probability of being below normal, of being near normal, and of being above normal. So when there's nothing showing here, it seems most of the models, and this map is actually created from an ensemble of multiple climate models, not just one model, multiple climate models. So basically, most of the models don't really agree on where we would be. On the average, they are thinking we would likely be near normal, or at least equal probability of being below normal, being near normal, or being above normal. And it's the same for precipitation as well. There's no color. Again, good for Saskatchewan, central Saskatchewan, showing there's a probability of being above normal, even if the probability is only 40 to 50%. But across Manitoba, again, there's equal chance that we would be above, below, or just at normal. So unfortunately, there isn't really much that the forecast is telling us of what's going to happen over the next 3 months. But yeah, we just have to wait and see. And with that, I will turn it over back to Ailey to give us more updates on some of the new things that the Manitoba Agriculture Weather Program have been doing over the last little while.
Okay, thanks, Timmy. Yeah, so I'll wrap up the presentation with just a couple more slides on kind of what we've been up to this past growing season. Okay, so in the summer of 2021, we actually constructed 3 new weather stations. So we're going to have a new data available in Richard, Manitoba, Petersfield, as well as Clarkley, which is not shown here yet. It's very new. It was actually just built late this fall. So the station pages that we're seeing, they're not live on the web page yet, but do stay tuned. I expect they'll be added in the next couple of weeks. And you can see the link below on where to access these current condition pages for our entire network. And similarly, we'll be adding that data into the real-time conditions or near real-time conditions interactive map as well. The link below there to access the map is available. So again, stay tuned. We'll get this data flowing into this map as well. And just to wrap up, a big thank you to our small but mighty team. We couldn't do it without Adam and Kevin, our field technologists, Allison, who is our ag met specialist, who I'm actually acting for while she's on leave, and of course Brian Wilson, our manager. So thanks again to Lionel and Lori for having us today, and to everybody who tuned in today. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks, guys. There's been a couple questions come in, and maybe I'll just take them as they came in. So Haley, on one of your maps there, you were showing the average degree days over 30 degrees. And what would be the average number, or would you know the average number of days that we are over 30 degrees, or kind of what's the normal?
Yeah, I can jump in there.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Timmy.
Yeah, I think at least in Winnipeg, usually the average would be, I think, to have about 15 days above 30 degrees in a typical year.
Okay, I think that's what that question wanted. Another one that's come in is how much snow would it take to equal 1 inch of rain, and is there a difference in the snow quality?
Yeah, no, there's actually quite a difference. Again, as I'm sure most folks would know, that some rain would be wetter than others. Some snow will be drier than others. The actual last week's snow was actually one of those wet snows, because again, it's early in the fall. But basically, we do use an equivalence of 10:1 is what we use to convert. Now, again, that's just an average. It doesn't mean that every time you melt, a ball of snow, you would have that exact ratio. But what that means is that when you have 1 centimeter of snow, that's equivalent to 1 millimeter of water. So that's the ratio 10:1. So if you have, say, again, 30 centimeter of snow, that would equate to about 30 millimeters of water.
Okay. Any comments on how the weather stations have been working, been getting sometimes when our weather station is not up and running? I guess that might be some of the weather stations. Have you been having problems with any of the weather stations? I guess maybe that's what they're getting at.
Oh, okay. So basically, again, with the weather stations, the automated stations, so sometimes we do have quite a range of things that could have happened, and that's part of what we tend to do, myself, Ailey, and our technicians, Adam and Kevin. Or I should say, Adam actually recently started working with Environment Canada. So yeah, we just have it's slightly lower. I mean, fewer number of folks working with the program, but basically, when a station is not reporting, we do know about it, and it can be a range of things. Sometimes it's not even anything with the station, it's just the network, because our stations tend to be in remote location where sometimes cell signal are actually very spotty. Despite the fact that we have we do have antenna to boost the network signal. Sometimes we just lose network, especially around this time of the year when things start getting cold and we don't have very strong signal. So that can be part of it. When that happens, it usually doesn't result in loss of data when the signal comes back, sometimes after a couple of days, sometimes after, again, maybe more than a couple of days, we do have all the data coming back. So the network, the station is still working okay. It's just that we do have signal loss. There have been occasions, and very few occasions, when, again, around this time of the year, with the change in the weather, where the battery pack actually is not holding up as it should. So if the battery level actually goes below critical, the station has been programmed to go on what we call power save mode. So instead of reporting every hour, which is what we set it to do between November and April, we set the station to report every hour. And then during the growing season, between, I think, April and October, it reports every 15 minutes during the day and only hourly at night, again, to conserve the battery. So basically, if the station has very poor voltage on the battery, it would automatically switch to power save mode. And on power save mode, it only reports twice a day, at midnight and 1 p.m. And we do monitor that and see if the battery is able to get well charged up and kick back to working okay. If that does not happen, after a few days or weeks, we would go to the station and change the battery pack. So again, with any electronics, there are multiple points for potential failure, but it's something that we are usually on top of. And every morning, it's part of our morning routine to check the status of each weather station within the network and try to document what needs to be done.
Yeah, and then if I could add to that, like Timmy mentioned, we're typically aware of stations when they are offline, and we'll try to get them as soon as we can. But please do call us. Please let us know if your station is offline. We love to hear that it's missed and that it's needed. So although we probably likely already know, it is still good to hear from folks. So feel free to email me directly, or you can call the ARD info line as well.
Okay, good. I guess one question I have is, how are you set up for weather stations? Are you looking for more if you are, there's certain areas you're looking for, this may be a chance for us to easier find some stations, especially if you're needing some in some areas.
Yes, thanks, Lionel, for bringing that up. We do, and that's something that I'll be working on over the next few months, is identifying some locations where we do have gaps in our network. I should have put a slide together for this, but if I could just rattle off a few that I recall. So we'll be looking to add a station in Ashern, Amaranth, Ericsdale, Brookdale, Angusville, and you know, in the Jordan Corner area as well, south of Carmen. You know, I'm probably missing a couple, but if there's any way that I could kind of follow up on that, Lionel, with a map or at least a list of areas where we're looking to build by the end of 2023, I can certainly pass that info along to you, Lionel.
Sure, if you wouldn't mind, and then I could maybe put it up on one of the future webinars or future crop talks, and then just it's a good way to get it out to people. And you know, somebody may be listening that you mentioned a town in that area and may be interested in having it on their location. So good opportunity to get that out.
That'd be so great. A lot of where we build our stations are word of mouth. So yeah, that'd be super. Thank you.
Great. I guess that I think is taking care of all the questions that have come in. We've had a couple comments on a great presentation, guys. So again, thank you again for coming on and giving that information. And I think it's something that we always almost look forward to on Crop Talk. There's a lot of people that like hearing what the weather situation is. Before you leave, any comments on what's happening out west? Probably I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but we're getting so much rain and stuff out there. Anything you can comment on, or is it just a big storm?
Yeah, I can comment on that. And I actually want to start by saying again, thoughts and prayers with folks out in BC, especially with the landslide and the tons of rain that is happening there. I think some areas around Abbotsford have declared emergency and evacuating. So that, and again, it also goes to highlight the impact of, again, climate change. I know that some of these things do happen in the past, but the frequency of occurrence now seem to be at a greater frequency. I would say typically most of the systems we have sometimes start from the southwest, or sometimes start just from the west. So I would expect that in the next few days, the system may make its way down here more as snow rather than rain, if it doesn't stop midway in the tracks. But I would say we can definitely use more in terms of snowfall. So as much as possible, I would say this year is one that we definitely would hope to have above normal precipitation, such that, as I showed in the presentation, it will take a while for the surface soil temperature to get frozen, at least not for another 2-3 weeks. Maybe 2 weeks, I would say. Actually, last year it happened on November 6th, was when about half of our station at the 2-inch depth was frozen. And now that's been almost 2 weeks past what's happened last year. So it's a good thing that we are not having the soil frozen yet, such that when the snow do melt, we would have more of infiltration and less of runoffs.
Great, thanks Timmy and Haley, and again, well done presentation.
Yeah, thank
you. Now we're just going to go through a few more slides here I put together just to let you know some of the things that's happening in the next couple of weeks, maybe even next month or so. So one of the things is somebody that's been on Crop Talk quite a bit, John Hurd, and is involved in a brown bagger agronomy series. So that's coming up on November the 29th from 11 to 1. They've got guest speakers, Don Clayton is going to be on, also Joanne Weiland. So they're going to be talking, you can see the agendas right there. So there's some good topics, especially when we're looking at high price fertilizer, and we're definitely going to be talking about that for the next little while. So if you're interested in that, there's a link right there to go to register, and the good thing about it is it's free, so you get a lot of good information, and you can have your lunch as you're listening. Next thing happening is Stock Talk webinars are going to start up again here shortly. So on December the 9th, I think is the first one, and they start at 1 and go till 2. And there's the agenda for the one on December 9th, and then the future webinars listed below. And so if you're interested in that, there's a link to register, similar as you would be registering for CropTalk. And again, a place to get a lot of good information and listen to a lot of people that have been working throughout the season, whether it be on rations through to the new programs announced for assistance. And somebody just asked if we can link the brown bag to be shared over email. And I guess they tried to click on it there. Yeah, and I'm sorry that was just a picture of the advertisement for it. So I will get the link, get Lori, maybe if she could send the link out to everybody for that one. So, okay, so that's the Stock Talk. And again, I mentioned when I had the Stock Talk up there that they're going to be talking about on the first webinar some of the programs that are available for people to get assistance. I think it's important for everybody to be taking advantage of these and helping to offset some of the costs, whether it be buying feed, moving livestock. This program is set up for that, so definitely if you're needing that kind of thing, definitely contact either the 1-800 number here, or these are the contact information for our livestock people, and so they'll be able to walk you through, as well as your local MASC office can help you out in that as well. So definitely take advantage of that information and get your applications in. Hay listing service is still being kept up, and there's hay being bought and sold through there. And so definitely, if you're in need of feed, take a look there for getting feed. Another thing that's coming up that's going to be, I guess I was going to say new, but it's just coming back after a year or so. Ag Days 2022 is happening January 18th, 19th, and 20th. Again, so that's something that I think a lot of people have been waiting for. So mark those days on your calendar. Here's the ag adaptation specialists in the region or in the province. So if you've got questions, whether it be crops, livestock, anything, if you need to get a hold of somebody, if they can't help you with the answers or the questions you have, they can definitely find the people that are out there that can give you the answers. I mentioned the MASC offices. Here's the offices in the province. So if you have questions, whether it be from crop insurance to the programs that are available for feed assistance, definitely contact these offices. I don't know for sure the deadline, probably coming up for your harvest production reports. So definitely you should be keeping in contact with these offices. And I guess that does it for today. So thanks again for your attendance. Thanks for Timmy and Haley for the presentation. And we'll see you December 1st. So again, every kind of second week here. So December 1st will be our next edition of Crop Talk. Thanks for attending.